Começaram a sair as prévias do Persona 3 Reload. Pensei da gente fazer um react aqui, especificamente do da GameSpot, que eu acho que tem uma duração bacana, pra gente ter uma ideia realmente de como é que tá o remake, a partir de gente que colocou as mãos no jogo, uma parte maior do que a gente colocou lá na BGS, né? Quem testou lá com aquela demozinha, não deu nem pra sentir o gostinho direito, então vamos lá.
When I picked up the controller and put my headphones on to play Persona 3 Reload for the first time, I was hit with a wave of nostalgia. I knew where everything was in the halls of Gekukan High School, I knew all the spots at Paulownia Mall, and I knew where to find all my friends across the city of Port Island. And the fresh remixing of old songs hit me deeply to instill Persona 3's unique mix of joy and dread all over again.
Cara, é muito estiloso, né? O Persona não tem jeito, cara. Até as transições.
Based on a preview I played, P3R looks to be as faithful of a remake as one could possibly ask for. It's very much that same PS2 era RPG that first established Persona's social sim and calendar systems alongside the dungeon crawling gameplay.
Ah lá, velho. Pô, que isso.
But now with an art style and visual flourishes reminiscent of Persona 5. Even though my demo was only a little over an hour long, I was already starting to piece together what P3R is from what I saw and the 5 or so times I finished Persona 3 in its various older forms. That's not to say there aren't modernizations beyond the visual overhaul, however. Little things like easier ways to track your daily activities and bigger deals like revamped social links let you get more out of the characters during your free time in game. When it comes to Tartarus, it serves the same purpose as in the original game, that 250 floor tower where most of the combat and exploration takes place, but numerous quality of life updates give the dungeon crawling some much needed momentum. And you can count on the tried and true turn-based combat system that revolves around elemental affinities and swapping personas for different movesets to be as satisfying as it was the first time around. In Reload, however, each party member has Theurgy attacks, which you can think of as limit breaks, and there's also a baton pass mechanic like in Persona 5 that helps you hit weaknesses with greater efficiency.
Pegaram
Maintaining
bastante
the
coisa do
original
Persona 5,
experience
né?
with sensible updates was the intention, according to director Takeo Yamaguchi, who told me in an interview, quote, "We knew if we changed too much, it would start losing the spirit and the soul of what made Persona 3. We looked at every single part, even the small stuff, and we discussed amongst the teams, can we change this without losing that essence? Would it feel less like Persona 3? And so that's kind of how we decided what we would change." Lead producer
tem que ser
Ryota
assim,
Nitsuma
cara.
also said,
Mudar o que
quote,
pode sem
"Over
perder
half
o
the staff
estilo."
working on Persona 3 Reload were people who were players when the original one came out. But each one of them has their own idea of what makes Persona 3 special, so there's very much a lot of love being put into it, but then obviously lots of different opinions.
Dude, right?
Now that I've actually played it, it seems Atlus leaned heavily on upholding the spirit and intent of the source material at the end of the day. The silent, blue-haired emo boy with his headphones hanging around his neck as the protagonist, he's still that dude. Classmates and party members of the Seas crew are just as how you remember them all those years ago, while being presented in a few new ways. I gathered as much in the demo that dropped me in the early part of the game, where I could roam around the school and city and initiate a few social links during my free time. While there are completely new social link events, they're still driving the same themes on familiar character arcs within a largely unchanged framework. But more striking were the new social events that featured all of the cast up to this point chilling in the dorm at night, bonding over seemingly mundane things, or cooking together. Like, these are small but sweet moments that bring a bit more charm out of the crew that has been through and will go through some rough times.
Pô, é isso que eu
I
gosto
also
do
hope that
Persona,
in
tá
the
ligado?
process of rethinking these
Esses momentos
elements, the game can
pequenos.
grow up a little bit and move on from some of the wildly problematic lines of dialogue and cringy social link events from the original game. It's worth noting how the more granular sequence of narrative events have been shuffled around a little bit. So I asked about the extent to which they changed story events, and Yamaguchi said, quote, "We haven't made any major changes to the story itself. We wanted to keep the main story as it was. However, what we did do is we added new social link episodes and story deep dives that flesh out the world a little bit. As you did notice, we made a
Perfect.
couple of tweaks to the timing of when things happen. However, nothing major that would affect the overall game. We did look at the game as a whole and made decisions to change the order of little things that will improve the overall experience." Now, from a
Deixar
gameplay
com ritmo
perspective,
melhor, né,
adhering
talvez.
to the original vision may turn out to be one of its biggest shortcomings. Ascending the floors of Tartarus is likely to be a repetitive grind again, just as it was back then. I do get a kick out of going into a mental autopilot and clearing out randomly generated floors before reaching the next big boss battle, but when Tartarus is the driving force for combat, outside of some bespoke story-centric sequences, your patience can wear thin. I do love the new eccentric visual stylings that
Mas
exude an
ele
air of
falou assim no
confidence
início que eles
I
deram
love
uma
seeing in this
mexidinha ainda
cast
no
of
Tartarus.
characters, which makes the gameplay experience all the more enjoyable. It's the untouched foundational aspects that may highlight the fact that this was indeed a product of its time and the first attempt at the modern Persona formula. However, Persona 3 is so much more than dungeon crawling through Tartarus. There's something timeless about its take on a coming-of-age tale and how people handle tragedy early on in their lives. Despite the upbeat overtones you get upon first impression, an ever-present existential dread hangs over the entire game, and what comes out of it is an emotionally honest story that's delivered through characters I consider the strongest in the Persona pantheon. Even if you don't see it from the outset, each member of the Seize crew is broken in some way, and they're very forthright in confronting the pain that comes with that.
I'm far more in my element here. Let me show you that I haven't lost my touch.
Given the time since the release of the original game, I asked Yamaguchi about his perception of Persona 3's darkness and how that may have evolved over the years. He said, quote, "Death, the end of things, and how to spend your limited time remaining, these are themes that don't really fade with time. All
Sim.
humans are kind of always facing that. As someone from when I first
Cara, eu
played the
diria
game
que
to
hoje tá
now,
até pior,
I probably
viu?
feel about it the same way as I used to. In many ways, the most important parts that made Persona 3 what it was haven't changed." End quote. Now, how the cast's personalities are woven into the story's themes remains some of the best character work I've seen in an RPG. I'm hoping all of that still comes through in Reload, and I came away from the preview demo confident that it can, especially considering the new voice actors who embody each character extremely well. It's almost shocking how they're able to capture familiar tones, yet feel different enough to be fresh and spirited takes on characters I've known for so long. And that's all I could really ask from this new cast, for them to take ownership of these roles while staying true to who these characters have always been.
Roger that. I'm always ready.
Ele tá falando aqui do cast americano, né?
Are you ready?
É,
Then there's
e
the
cara,
soundtrack.
Persona
At
5
first listen, I had some reservations
Tem
about
cast
the new
muito bom
music,
também.
particularly the
Até o
re-recorded
americano.
versions of old tracks.
só a pronúncia de palavra japonesa que é meio esquisita.
But I'm happy to report that the spirit remains intact. From the demo alone, I've heard some brand new songs that are already stuck in my head and absolutely nail the vibe of Persona 3.
The enemy's detected. We've got the upper hand.
Part of that comes from rapper Lotus Juice, who returns to lend his unmistakable flow and deep vocals for Reload's music.
Good to go.
Let's change tack.
Persona 3's soundtrack is so memorable for being this wild mix of soulful J-pop and new metal rap rock that shouldn't work, yet absolutely does, which has been ingrained
Pô,
into its
como não?
identity
Funciona
and
assim,
legacy.
né?
When I think about it, a remake of
Ai,
Persona 3 in this vein used to be a pie-in-the-sky wish for me, daydreaming of reliving one of the most personally impactful stories fully realized in a modern visual style akin to Persona 5. It's the thing I ruminated on most when I reviewed Persona 3 Dancing in Moonlight years ago. While we won't get a reimagining of the post-game story called The Answer from Persona 3 FES, or the female lead from Portable, who I still consider the best Persona protagonist, Persona 3 Reload seems to be hitting all the right notes. It won't necessarily replace the original versions, because the PS2 era has a way of encapsulating a specific time and place that just can't be replicated. I suppose it's in Persona 3's DNA to never get a truly definitive version, but if Persona 3 Reload can send the same message as powerfully as it did in the mid-2000s, I'll say it's a remake worth having.
É, então, eu vi também muita gente falando isso, né? De que tem algumas coisas que o Reload, né? O remake que a gente vai ter aqui agora, não pega de algumas outras interações que o Persona 3 já teve. Essa vai ser, como eu falei com vocês algumas vezes, né? Meu primeiro contato com o Persona 3. O primeiro e único Persona que eu joguei foi o 5. Mas, assim, eu já tenho dado aquela leve pesquisada de como que é o Persona 3 e tal, pra ter essa base de comparação. E, pelo visto, tá bem fiel, realmente, né? Dando umas olhadas em comparação. É claro que eles estão mudando um pouquinho, né? O outro tinha até um cenário e uma construção, assim, um pouco mais... Ele parecia um pouquinho menor, né? Porque os bonequinhos, eles eram menos realistas, por assim dizer. Eles tinham uma cabeça um pouco maior e tal. Uma integração, às vezes uma modernização, eu acho, que do Persona 3 em relação à sua gameplay, mas sem perder a essência. Muita coisa, inclusive, do Persona 5, né? A gente começa a ver que puxou-se de inspiração lá do Persona 3, né? Então, isso é bem legal de ver, então, o 3 sendo refeito logo depois de a gente ter o Persona 5. E eu tô muito curioso, cara, porque eu ouço falar bem do Persona 3 desde quando eu comecei a jogar o Persona 5. Então, eu acho que é uma boa desculpa pra eu começar e ver como é que é essa versão aqui do jogo. E também pra quem conheceu a franquia assim como eu, que foi muitas pessoas, né? Conheceram a franquia assim como eu no Persona 5. Tô curioso, mas diz aí abaixo, rapaziada. Você que jogou, às vezes, o Persona 3, o Fast, ou jogou o Portable, o que você, além da protagonista feminina, você acha que vai ficar faltando aí no Persona 3 Reload? E se tu tá animado de forma geral aí pra ver esse remake, comenta aí abaixo, curtiu o vídeo, deixa aquele crítico aí no like, se inscreve no canal e segue a gente nas nossas redes sociais, pode ser? Eu ficando por aqui, valeu, um abraço, até mais, galera, fui!